Welcome TechRadar's constantly updated best movies on Netflix UK list, our pick of the films you should be in on Netflix right now. Netflix has a lot of movies on offer, but if you only have time for quality then you're in the right place. Here you'll find a list of the best Netflix movies you can get in the UK. It's constantly updated so you know you're never missing out. Update: sci-fi classic Gattaca, which is set in a world that favors the genetically blessed, and Stephen King's gory classics Carrie and Misery all enter our best movie list as of March 2018. It's also worth mentioning that Sky has announced a new partnership with Netflix, bringing the Ing service to Sky Q customers. Netflix has become known for its TV shows, especially its originals, but that doesn't mean you should be discounting the movies on the platform. Many of them are well worth it, and as you'll see from our extensive list, there are plenty to choose from once you've exhausted yourself by TV binging. The best movies on Netflix do keep things neat, tidy and easy to navigate. We've broken up our movie picks into categories. For each category we've chosen a selection of movies that you shouldn't miss, with further recommendations listed at the end of each category. In all there's over 150 movies to choose from here, all picked because they are, simply, the best films on Netflix to right now. From comedy to indie, to horror and kids, there's a movie category for everyone. Keep checking back, too. Unlike its TV output that seems to stay on Netflix for longer, its movies tend to appear and disappear quite fast. We keep this best Netflix movies list updated as often as we can, so please bookmark us. Enjoy. Want to know more about Netflix's take on binging? Here's what we found out when we visited Netflix HQ. It's the movie which finally won Leonardo the Oscar, and for good reason. The Revenant is a ferocious look at mankind's survival against the odds. And when those odds include soldiers, bears and inhospitable lands, they are definitely no in your favor. Shot entirely with available light, this is a stark movie but one that demands to be seen on the biggest screen possible. It's the perfect horror setup. 10 strangers are stranded in a motel thanks to a rainstorm. At the same time, a murderer is about to be executed, only for his psychiatrist to make a last-ditch effort to keep him alive. So, how are these two tales linked? Well, that would be telling. Directed by the Wolverines' James Mangold, Identity may think it's brainier than it is, but at least it's a whole lot of fun. Shane Black is never someone to play the Hollywood game. Starting off as a hotshot writer, he penned Lethal Weapon at a ridiculously young age. He went into obscurity, only to come back with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and cement his relationship with Robert Downey Jr. This then pushed him into the director chair for Iron Man 3, which was a great choice. Fun, overblown and with a surprising twist. It's delicious fun. This star-studded war film features Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, Logan Lerman, Michael Peña, John Bernthal and Jason Isaacs, and follows U.S. tank crews in Nazi Germany during the last days of World War II. Based on real experiences by the crews of these machines, Fury is a powerful and moving account that was very well received by critics and audiences alike. Nobody expected Mad Max: Fury Road to be as good as it was, given it was stuck in development hell for ages, but it's one of the boldest, bravest chase movies ever made. Tom Hardy is superb as the monosyllabic Max. But it's Charlize Theron's Furiosa who steals the show, a true modern-day badass. Director George Miller decided to do most of the action in camera and the results are utterly spectacular. A biographical war drama directed by Mel Gibson, Hacksaw Ridge tells the true story of conscientious objector Desmond T. Doss, Andrew Garfield. Despite refusing to bear arms through his service during WW II, Doss won the Congressional Medal of Honor and adoration and respect of his peers for his bravery and selflessness in the conflict. Ridley Scott's bombastic tale of U.S. soldiers caught behind enemy lines when their helicopter crashes in Somalia is frenetic and relentless. You'll have as much fun in it as spotting the young actors who you kind of know but don't know, including Hugh Dancy, Johan Grufford and Ewan Bremner. It's a bit jingoistic and the bloodshed is sometimes over the top, but it's a superb. We need guns. Lots of guns. Okay, that quote is from the wrong Keanu Reeves movies but does sum up the essence of John Wick. This is a movie packed with more gun fu than is healthy, but it's also great fun. The premise is sight. John Wick Reeves is a retired hitman who comes back to avenge the death of this dog. Yup, you read that right. As action movies go, this is one of the most frenetic, Reeves is perfectly cast in the title role, and while the plot is paper-thin, the hits to A Bigger World when assassins rule the roost are fantastic, and something that's built on in the sequel, a masterpiece in both filmmaking and fight choreography. Ang Lee's superb Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon tells the tale of a Chinese warrior who steals a sword off of a master swordsman and the cat-and-mouse chase that ensues. Chow Yun-fat may have been the star of the movie when it was first released, but it is Michelle Yeoh and Zhang Zi that steal the show. A follow-up was produced by Netflix, which is worth a but has none of the charisma of its enigmatic predecessor. Quentin Tarantino's bloody brilliant kung fu opus should have been one big movie. But its distributors got cold feet, which meant we actually got two quite different films. The first is Pure Shaw Brothers Schlock, a revenge tale that follows Uma Thurman's bride looking to kill people on her hit list, for murdering her husband and family on her wedding day and leaving her for dead. The second film is a touch more subdued but no less brutal, starting with a flashback of the infamous wedding and then furthering the bride's mission to kill Bill. If you can, them together, as it's an epic movie that should be consumed in one sitting. After the brilliance of Skyfall, there was a lot riding on Spectre to keep the quality levels of Bond high. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. Spectre is rushed, overblown and of twists that don't particularly work. But even at its worst, it's better than most action movies around at the moment. Daniel Craig is, as ever, brilliant, as is Elia Qute Seydoux, who has more about her than the usual paper-thin token femme fatale. There's also a barrage of lovely throwbacks from the Bond of old, including a superb intro that smacks of Live and Let Die. It may be the fifth Mission Impossible, but it's definitely one of the best. Tom Cruise is back as Ethan Hunt, the secretive IMF operative who is tasked to save his agency as a Rogue One is hell-bent on destroying it. Christopher McQuarrie was a great choice for director, and while news that he completely reshot the ending of the movie was a worry, its lack of bombast is a perfect balance to a film that's filled with thrilling set pieces. Also, Rebecca Ferguson is by far the best female lead the franchise has had so far. We're glad she's been cast in the next installment too. With a script by word genius William Goldman and George Roy Hill at the helm, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a wonderful. Paul Newman and Robert Redford, whose screen chemistry as the titular pair and the by Burt Bacharach is lovely on the ears. It's funny too, mixing both buddy movie and western tropes with fantastic results. Focused around a turf war between rival street gangs, The Warriors is an achingly cool cult film. It showcases 70s New York in all its filth and fury, and while its focus is on gang fighting, the film never comes across as an exploitation flick. This is because it's shot with such style and flourish by director Walter Hill that 37 years on, it's still as pertinent as ever. Oh, Paul Verhoeven, how we've missed you. Elle brings back everything the director is famed for: controversy, satire and, well, more controversy. Elle sees the fantastic Isabelle Huppert play a businesswoman who is raped and decides to exact revenge on her rapist, except she doesn't know who it is. Elle never goes the way you think it's going to go and, despite the subject matter, is genuinely funny in places. It's occasionally a tough but doesn't offer the gratuity that some of Verhoeven's other films are famed for. It's Huppert here that makes the movie. She is subversive and simply superb. This is a wholly different Spike Lee movie than what he had made before, and that's what makes Inside Man feel so fresh. It's a fast-paced, witty genre movie that sees Lee at his most accessible. Some of Spike Lee's best cinematography can be seen in this movie, and while Clive Owen never really gets into his stride, he's still superb as a bank robber. It's Jodie Roberts who steals the show, though. She's utterly mesmerizing every time she's on the screen. Spotlight is that rare beast of a movie, a tense, taut thriller that's based mainly around a newsroom, with nary an explosion or chase in sight. It centers on a team of reporters and editors at the Boston Globe who investigate what they believe is a devastating cover-up by the Catholic Church. A star-studded cast propels a fantastic script. Spotlight thoroughly deserved its Best Picture Oscar. This generated a nice bit of buzz at Sundance, and for good reason. Bad Day for the Cut is a grim, gripping Irish thriller about a farmer looking to avenge the death of his mother. First-time writer-director Chris Bohr knows how to ratchet up the tension, and it certainly knows how to hit some nasty notes. Yes, you'll probably guess where things are going to go, but it's still a decent. Personal Shopper is a strange but captivating movie. It shows off the acting prowess of Kristen Stewart, who is superb as an American personal shopper living in Paris who caters to the needs of an infuriating supermodel. And it just so happens, Stewart's character is also a medium who starts to interact with what she believes is her not-long-dead brother. Personal Shopper is one movie which doesn't let you really know what it wants to be until the end, and that is what makes it great. Tom Hanks and director Steven Spielberg team up with dazzling results for Bridge of Spies. Based on the true tale of a Russian spy sent back to the cold in exchange for 2 U.S. prisoners of war, Hanks plays a lawyer brought in to make sure that the exchange takes place. The tension is high but the voices are low. The quiet chats between Hanks and the superb Mark Rylance are astonishing too. A biographical drama from Danny Boyle and Adam Sorkin, Steve Jobs follows the life of the eponymous Apple co-founder, Michael Fassbender, from 1984 to 1998. The performances in the film and its screenplay were widely praised and received recognition at the Golden Globes, BAFTAs, and the Academy Awards. American Graffiti is a classic coming-of-age film with a host of stellar Hollywood names behind it including George Lucas, Harrison Ford, Richard Dreyfuss, and Ron Howard. Set in early 1960s California, the film tells the separate stories of a group of recent high school graduates and the rock and roll culture that defined them through a series of vignettes. Mudbound proves that Netflix is getting serious with the movies it is producing. This superb ensemble drama focuses on two brothers, Garrett Hedlund and Jason Clarke, back from the Second World War and the struggles they face adjusting back to normal life. The film pulls no punches when it comes to tackling racism and ism, both rife in 1940s Mississippi, but layers these heady issues with a fair amount of levity and brevity. The cast is superb. Better Call Saul's Jonathan Banks is riveting as always, but Jason Mitchell is standout here, but it's the tight script and wonderful, sweeping direction by Dee Reese that makes this movie truly an Oscar-worthy. It's rare that Tom Cruise gets upstaged in his movies, but that's what happens in Rain Man. This is because Dustin Hoffman puts in a performance of a lifetime as Charlie's, Cruise's, autistic brother Raymond. In the film we see Hoffman recite dates of airline crashes when he doesn't want to fly, and this brings the brothers on a road trip after their father passes away. Cruise's character is unlikable for the most part, but his softening to Hoffman's Raymond is a beautiful, sometimes hilarious, sometimes tender. Director Adam McKay was known for creating big belly laughs before The Big Short came out. And that's what makes this movie such a surprise. It is funny in places, but it's also a super sharp look and shock horror, endlessly entertaining look at those who betted big that the housing bubble in the US would burst in the mid-2000s. Filled with fantastic characters, played by Brad Pitt, Christian Bale, Ryan Gosling and Steve Carell, and a superb script, this is a must-see. Inherent Vice is a fantastic film, but one you may want to twice to figure out just what is going on. Director P.T. Anderson, this is his best movie, tries to make sense of Thomas Pynchon's opaque novel, about a stoner detective trying to figure out the disappearance of his ex-lover's lover. Nothing makes sense in the movie. It's covered in a fog of weed and hallucinogens, dripping in Californian sunshine and swathed in seediness. Don't try and unpick it too much and you will be rewarded with a brilliant, beguiling. This shouldn't have worked. The manic tale of how NWA came to be may well be larger than life, but in the wrong hands it could end up being cartoonish. On the whole, Straight Outta Compton manages to avoid this thanks to director F. Gary Gray, who also created the brilliant Friday. Casting for Compton is inspired. O'Shea Jackson Jr. does a great impression of his real-life dad Ice Cube, but it's Corey Hawkins that steals the show of Dr. Dre. Perhaps the weakest link is Paul Giamatti as Jerry Heller, but it doesn't detract from what is one of the more entertaining biopics in recent years. Dope was a revelation when it was released in 2015. Part coming-of-age drama, part hip-hop homage, the movie is about a group of teenagers who go to a party and end up tangled up in drug dealing. While that's all very gritty, the film plays it for laughs more than often, punctuated by moments of drama. The movie may now be parodied beyond belief, but The Breakfast Club is still a fun. It's an 80s movie that's so 80s it should come with its own shell suit. The premise is simple. A bunch of kids are put into detention one Saturday, dubbed The Breakfast Club. They're all a different stereotype: geek jock, the pretty one, the angry one, and seemingly have nothing in common, but it turns out they have everything in common. Yes, it's cheesy, but you can't help but smile as the kids find themselves to the tune of Simple Minds. This is one of the most affecting movies that you will ever see. Based on the true story of Oskar Schindler, a factory owner who begins to help his Jewish workers during World War II after he sees them persecuted by the Nazi Germans. The movie is a study in brevity. Steven Spielberg manages to find the human stories in the atrocity of World War II without shying away from the true horror of what happened during the conflict. A heartfelt and considered look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s struggle to gain equal voting rights, campaigning in racially charged Alabama. Selma was one of the finest films of 2014 and was rightly nominated for a Best Picture Oscar as a result. It may have missed out on the Top Gun, but David Oyelowo's performance as the civil rights leader is a powerful one, with a supporting cast recreating the inspiring story with great respect. The Virgin Suicides is a woozy homage to movies such as Picnic at Hanging Rock and Don't Look Now. Fractured in its storytelling, dreamlike in its visuals, it's an assured debut by Sofia Coppola. Based on the best-selling novel, the movie charts a spate of suicides in a small town and the cast is led by the mesmerizing Kirsten Dunst. It is still baffling how Slumdog Millionaire was billed as the feel-good hit of the summer when it was first released. There is nothing feel-good about this rag-to-riches tale, apart from the very end. It is a sublime, though. Director Danny Boyle relishes the colors in India, using them to great effect while there's a frenetic pace to the whole thing. Lovely stuff. Adapted from Stephen King's novella, Shawshank Redemption is a film that tissues were invented for. Andy Dufresne, Tim Robbins, is sentenced to life in prison for 2 murders he didn't commit. There he befriends Red Morgan Freeman, and embarks on both serving his sentence and trying to clear his name. Heartwarming and gut-wrenching in equal measure, Shawshank is a modern classic. Captain Phillips is a masterstroke of suspense. Directed by Paul Greengrass, the Bourne franchise king, it's about the true story of a 2009 hijacking of a U.S. container ship. By showing the hijack from both points of view, the captains and the Somali pirates, the film humanizes what is a complicated, horrific hostage situation. Don't let the title or, for that matter, the plot put you off. Warrior is a fantastic movie, centered on 2 brothers who find redemption and solace in the biggest MMA tournament ever held. A superb script and superb performances from Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton as the brothers and Nick Nolte as the alcoholic father make this a must-see. This study of the Holocaust is something we haven't seen before. It's from the point of view of someone who was forced to burn the bodies in Auschwitz who comes across a boy that, he believes, deserves a proper burial. Son of Saul is a hard. It's about a time that's filled with despair, but director Laszlo Nemes tells the tale so well that it makes for utterly compelling viewing. Not only did Network spawn one of the greatest lines shouted in a movie, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore," it also shone a light on US network television and its constant push for higher ratings. The plot is great. Longtime anchor Howard Beale finds out that he is about to get fired, so to drive ratings he announces he will commit suicide on air. What ensues is a harsh look at TV that's still prescient today. Nicholas Winding Refn is one of the most divisive directors around, and he's not looking to change that with a Neon Demon. Like Only God Forgives and the slightly more accessible Drive, Neon Demon is stylish, blood-soaked and, well, cold. It features a fantastic central performance by Elle Fanning and never compromises. This makes for a difficult but ultimately rewarding. All geniuses have to start somewhere, and this was where director Richard Linklater made his mark. Slacker got him noticed. Dazed made him one of the best directors around, with a movie that showed off the birth of slacker culture by following the last day of the school year in 1976. It flits between stereotypical characters of the cool one, the jock, the stoner, but digs a whole lot deeper than any John Hughes movie. Great stuff. Anyone who doubts the acting caliber of Tom Hardy needs to Bronson immediately. Directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who found fame with Drive and the divisive Only God Forgives, Bronson is a fragmented, surreal look at one of the UK's most famous prisoners, Charles Bronson. Hardy commands the screen as the titular inmate, bulking on the body mass and belting out charisma and chaos in equal measure. It's not for everyone, thanks to its obscure storytelling, but this is a unique film and one that demands your attention. Pulp Fiction is Quentin Tarantino at his finest. Endlessly quotable and always a refreshing, Tarantino reinvents what a crime movie should be. He does this by interlocking seemingly unrelated stories in a non-linear way, riffing on pop culture and breathing new life into old actors, including John Travolta, Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson. This film deserves all the accolades it's garnered over the years. It's just a shame Tarantino has never bettered it. It may feel a little dated now, but Fight Club was the epitome of male angst when it was first released. It's an angry movie, with work and consumerism in its sights, but it's also a brilliant one, thanks to David Fincher's knack of taking the novel and transposing it menacingly to the big screen. Brad Pitt has never been better as Tyler Durden, his role making you want to talk about Fight Club, instantly breaking the first rule. Okja is a fantastic movie that proves Netflix really does know what it's doing when it comes to commissioning films. Made by Bong Joon-ho, one of the greatest directors around, the film is the strange tale of a little girl and her best friend, a giant animal called Okja. The friendship is threatened when a CEO, a superb Tilda Swinton, wants to take Okja for nefarious means. The whole movie may well be an ode to animal activism, but it's such a refreshing movie that you don't mind it preaching to you on occasion. Now you have this on board Netflix, can you please grab the UK rights for Snowpiercer, another superb Bong Joon-ho movie that never saw the light of day in Britain. This is a movie that was close to not being made. Just as shooting began, funding was pulled, and it means that star Matthew McConaughey may have had to drop out, as he needed to put all the weight on he had lost for playing Ron Woodroof, an electrician diagnosed with AIDS. Money was found, though, and we're glad it was, as this is a sometimes harrowing but strangely uplifting account of someone who goes to the extra mile to get their hands on an experimental AIDS drug that can lessen the effects of the disease. McConaughey is fantastic as the makeshift drug runner, while his partner in crime is Jared Leto as Rayon, a trans woman who helps him on his journey. Despite the budget cut, there was Oscar nominations aplenty for the film, with it winning Best Makeup. Considering the makeup was done on $250 budget, this is an impressive feat. While Sweden didn't quite make it into popular parlance, Be Kind Rewind should be celebrated for showing what it's like to be someone who just wants to make films, no matter what budget they have. And that's the plot of Be Kind. It's about two video store clerks who erase all the footage from the tapes in their store, so go on to try and make the movies with no budget but a whole lot of charisma. If it didn't suffer from Paul Feig, I have no idea how to finish a movie, so I'll just let it run out of steam. Funny People would be seen as a classic. Unfortunately it does do that, but it also sees Adam Sandler in reflective mood as a comedian facing a terminal illness. Sandler sends up brilliantly an actor who chooses some of the worst roles known to man. Unfortunately, after this movie he also decided to start making the same sort of movies he ridicules in Funny People. The World's End is the worst of the Cornetto trilogy, but that's only because the other two are the superb Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. The premise is great. Gary King, Simon Pegg, gets his old friends together to relive a pub crawl of their childhood. The only problem is, everyone has grown up into self-respecting adults except him. But none of this matters when the group of lads get themselves into a very strange situation. Full of fantastic sight gags that made Baby Driver the success it was, The World's End doesn't quite hit the high notes it should, but it has a lot of fun trying in the process. What a brilliant film. Pride manages to weave message with entertainment effortlessly, charting the true tale of gay rights activists in the UK that help raise money for a small mining town when the strikes are happening. They're superb performances by all, but it's the ever-brilliant George Mackay who's stand out. Looking for a great crime thriller that'll make you laugh? You've found it. Robert De Niro stars as Jack Walsh, a bounty hunter who's offered $100,000 to bring in mob accountant Jonathan Mardukas, Charles Grodin. What starts out as a simple job gets complicated very quickly. The plot for this one is fantastic. It's a road movie centered around two teenage bike thieves who go on an adventure after they get word that 7 tons of cocaine has been shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland. Their plan is to get some of it and sell it for a better life. This is one of the funniest comedies to come out of Ireland for a while. It's got a distinct Adam. Young Offenders is a coming-of-age story with oodles of charm, a classic Jim Carrey comedy. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective follows a pie who specializes in missing animals cases. When the mascot for the Miami Dolphins goes missing, he's in for the case of his life. Expect a madcap adventure with a lot of energy and laughs. Richard Linklater's latest is a bedfellow to Dazed and Confused. Instead of the 80s, though, the 70s is used as a backdrop instead, and the focus here is very much what it is like to be a boy growing up into an adult. As with most Linklater movies, not much happens in the movie, but the characterization is so spot on that it really doesn't matter. One of the best films you probably missed in 2016, The Nice Guys, is cult director Shane Black at his best. achingly funny and whip-smart too. The film is about a private eye and a heavy in the 70s and the shenanigans they get up to. While Black went Hollywood with Iron Man 3, The Nice Guys sees him back where he belongs, among the indie elite. A cult comedy horror made in the same vein as Shaun of the Dead. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is a whole lot of fun. Hillbillies Tucker and Dale head out to a cabin in the woods for a vacation and, well, all horror breaks loose. With barrels of laughs and buckets of blood. Don't expect award-winning performances, but it's a lot of fun. Joe Dante perhaps doesn't get the credit he deserves as a filmmaker. His movies always err on the right side of subversive anarchic fun, and The Burbs is no exception. Starring Tom Hanks as a part of a neighborhood that have suspicion that the new neighbors that just moved in are killers, the film manages to keep you guessing right up until its fantastic twist. Yes, it's ridiculous, but The Burbs is ever able and will remind you fondly of the films you used to growing up, if you're a child of the 80s that is. The Coen brothers have made many a classic movie, but The Big Lebowski is their crowning achievement. The plot is based on a mistake. The dude, Jeff Bridges, just so happens to have the same name as someone who owes money to the mob. This mistaken identity leads the dude and his ragtag group of friends deep into the belly of the LA underworld. Endlessly quotable and hugely enjoyable, there is no other film like it. The Hunt for the Wilder People is a fantastic comedy from New Zealand director Taika Waititi. It's a movie about Ricky, a kid who's been passed through the welfare system, and his relationship with Uncle HEC, someone who didn't completely agree with having a foster child, and the unexpected whirlwind adventure they have together. Adult themes of loss, hope and love are seen through a child's eyes, which makes for some hilarious and sometimes poignant moments. The film was such a success it brought Waititi's talents to the attention of Marvel, who have snapped him up to direct Thor: Ragnarok. 40-Year-Old Virgin is pretty much what it says on the tin, a comedy about a man, Steve Carell, who has yet to understand the joys of and whose life is centered on his love for video games and collectible action figures. Which is nothing like any of the Tech Raider team, I can assure you. One of the finest comedies, featuring one of the finest comedy performances from Bill Murray. One of the finest comedies, featuring one of the finest comedy performances from Bill Murray. One of the finest comedies, featuring one of the finest comedy performances from Bill Murray. One of the finest comedies, featuring one of the finest feel-good fun oozes from this movie, which is loosely based on the life of English ski-jumping underdog Eddie, the Eagle, Edwards. While Hugh Jackman is the star power that got this film off the ground, it's Taron Egerton as the titular character that steals the show. Directed by Dexter Fletcher, he manages to find enough story and sprinkle in some fantasy to create a wondery warm. Sing Street's John Carney plays a familiar tune with his movies. They are essentially ALS that are fine too if you're not into ALS. But while Once was great but Maudlin and Begin Again was okay and Maudlin, Sing Street is fantastic. Centered around a bunch of Irish kids in the 80s who want to start a band, it's a brilliant and fun movie. Alexander Payne proves once again that he is one of the best directors around with Nebraska, a film that follows elderly Woody Grant, Bruce Dern, who embarks on a 750-mile journey to Nebraska to cash in the supposed winnings of a sweepstake. Nebraska is of heart but also home truths when Woody arrives back in his hometown after years away. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is the perfect 80s movie. It's got teenagers rebelling, budding romance, a great and a huge stick-it-to-the-man storyline. It's also got Matthew Broderick at his finest, as Bueller, and some great direction and writing by the legend that is John Hughes. Great stuff. Clueless is the best teenage-centered movie to come out of the 90s, which is no mean feat considering how many there were in that decade. The exploits of Cher, Alicia Silverstone, at a Beverly Hills high school spawned a whole host of real-life fashion faux pas, as well as a new line of dialogue that was, well, totally buggin'. There are so many one-liners and sight gags in Airplane that it really doesn't matter when a few of them don't work. The film skewers the many disaster movies of the 70s with this spoof so funny that it hasn't really been bettered. The stars of the movie are Leslie Nielsen as Dr. Rumack and Lloyd Bridges, chosen not just because of his comedy chops but because he had starred in many of the films that the movie was sending up. Let the Right One In is a chilling movie set in Sweden. Based on the novel by John Ajvide Lindqvist, the screenplay was written by the novelist. It's a romance of sorts about two children who become friends after one is bullied. Oh, and one of those children just happens to be a vampire. It's a more subdued film than the events in the book, but all the better for it. It's a film of atmosphere, fear and, well, romance. Creep was a mini-indie marvel when it came out a few years back. Ultra-low budget, it starred Mark Duplass and was based on his story about a videographer who puts an ad on Craigslist which leads to some terrifying home truths. In the sequel, Duplass is back and this time he lures someone to his home by claiming to be a serial killer. What ensues is a tense, brilliant lo-fi ride. Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula is an underappreciated gem. It uses some old-school cinematic techniques to give the movie a classic feel and it really works. Having back projection for some of the special effects offers up a really unnerving look at Dracula. Gary Oldman is fantastic as the titular character. The only letdown is Keanu Reeves, who is utterly miscast. If you can put up with that, though, then what you have is one of the most lavish horror movies ever made. The Purge is low budget but brilliantly high concept. The idea is that there is one day a year when the world can go a bit crazy murdering and looting and it's all completely legal. This makes for a fantastic adrenaline rush of a movie that's modeled on John Carpenter-style 80s heist movies. It's really good fun, as is a number of the sequels. Gerald's Game is one of Stephen King's leaner novels, with a majority of the action taking place in one room, with one woman, Jessie Burlingame, alone, handcuffed to a bed, after a night of passion goes awry, with just her thoughts, her dead husband, and a number of things that go bump in the night for company. With this in mind, director Mike Flanagan has managed to pull off an adaptation that could have been very one-note, by creatively bringing Burlingame's, a fantastic Carla Gugino, thoughts to life. It's a bit too melodramatic at times and does suffer from the King curse of never knowing how to properly end his stories, but there's a lot to like about this Netflix exclusive. A superb 80s tinge backs this fantastic film that plays on the notions of teen and angst by throwing in an STD that when transmitted passes a curse on. The movie manages to be filled to the brim with dread, even if the premise of the movie isn't really explained, and is a superb throwback to zombie movies of old, as well as the foreboding invasion of the body snatcher flicks. Blair Witch, the kind of remake, quasi-sequel to the scare classic The Blair Witch Project, was a big surprise when it first announced. Director Adam Wingard had made the film covertly with the title The Woods, and then when it premiered at San Diego Comic-Con, they announced its link to the Blair Witch story and the crowd went, well, crazy. The film is a worthy addition to the franchise. It keeps the shaky cam stuff but also adds in some modern-day twists such as drones and GPS. It takes a while to get going, but once the scares start, they're relentless. This super smart horror from Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard is a movie that tries its hardest to turn the horror genre on its head, with continual knowing nods to movies of the past and a postmodern spin of the well-worn cabin in the woods theme. Don't go into this movie expecting a normal filming experience, but do expect to have fun in a highly original script at play. The real horror in The Babadook isn't the monster, ripped from a children's pop-up book that may or may not be terrifying a mother and son, but the slow and steady psychological decline of the mother Amelia, played by a wonderful Essie Davis. The descent and fear she has at the thought of not being able to protect her child is mesmerizing, as is the rest of the film. Gripping stuff. Thanks to Netflix's sometimes surprising rights, Under the Shadow has popped onto the service around the same time as the movie's Blu-ray release. We're glad it has. It's a fantastic horror film set in Tehran in the 80s, focusing on a mother and daughter seemingly terrorized by otherworldly beings in an apartment block. The dread in this film is slow release but palpable, making it a terrific, scary, given Evil Dead 2 is a quasi-sequel, remake of the original Evil Dead. Eyebrows were raised when another remake was announced. Thanky, the movie is actually decent. Director Fede Alvarez plays the movie straight, piling on the gore and the tension, making for some terrifying moments. It feels like Evil Dead 2, thanks to both Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi coming on board as producers. This ultra-low-budget movie comes from the Duplass brothers and is one of the most inventive chillers in years. The plot is slight, it focuses on a man who answers a Craigslist ad to film what he thinks is a video for the person's unborn son. And that's all we will say about the plot, as it twists and turns in on itself, terrifying the viewer repeatedly in the process. Daniel Radcliffe has done well to rid himself of his Harry Potter persona, and it's all thanks to choosing roles in movies such as Women in Black. Based on the celebrated novel of the same name and in turn the stage play, the film is a gothic delight, harking back to the good old days when horror was implied rather than rammed down Ayer's throat. Well, until the final act at least. Prepare to feel your spine tingle. Insidious is a film that proves, if you want main horror done right, then you have to call up director James Wan. He brings a menacing atmosphere to this film about a family that moves into a house that's not what it seems. While it doesn't quite match up to the scares seen in Sinister, another film produced by Jason Blum, Wan does enough to make sure there's plenty of shocks to go around. While the cast may err on the side of main, Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson and Matthew Fox all star, the plot of Bone Tomahawk does not. Without giving too much away, it's essentially cannibals versus grizzled men of the Wild West. Russell is superb in this tale that is absolutely relentless and all the better for it. Hush has a brilliant premise. Directed by Mike Flanagan, it revolves around a killer who tries to get the best of a girl in the house on her own. So far so, every horror movie ever made, but the girl who is being stalked happens to be deaf. Yes, the home invasion genre is getting tired, but Hush manages to quietly breathe new life into it. A forgotten 70s gem of a horror movie, Let's Scare Jessica to Death is all soft focus and maudlin as we follow the exploits of a woman who has just gotten out of a psychiatric hospital. While staying in a country house to recuperate, she befriends a strange visitor. It's working just for John D. Hancock's dreamy direction. One of the more high-concept horrors on the list, Would You Rather, is about a group of 7 people who are invited to a millionaire's house to play a game of Would You Rather. The game turns out to be one of the most sadistic around. While it never quite reaches the perfection its visuals and stellar cast promises, Tomorrowland is a sumptuous. A throwback to the old sci-fi adventures of old, the film is based on the Tomorrowland ride at Disney. Cynics would say that the movie is just one big Disney promotion, but the movie is better than that. It's a great story that transcends dimensions, just sit back and go with it. Netflix surprised everyone when it revealed it had the rights to the 3rd installment of the Loose Cloverfield franchise, The Cloverfield Paradox, and now it has the original film. Each Cloverfield film is different, and the original uses the found footage narrative device to document an attack on New York by a huge alien monster. While the Cloverfield Paradox didn't quite capture the magic of the original, the first film is definitely worth catching while it's on Netflix. Given it was made in 1985, the effects of Back to the Future still stand up today. Actually, so does everything about the movie. It's a fantastic old-school romp that showcases Michael J. Fox as one of the most affable actors around. Spielberg may have only produced the movie, but his fingerprints are all over it. Back to the Future is a classic that is endlessly fun and readable. There is a disturbance in the Force. Be honest, we weren't expecting a Star Wars movie to grace Netflix, given the Mouse House will be doing its owning service, but Star Wars: The Force Awakens has landed, and what a movie it is. Part reboot, part reimagining, all Star Wars: The Force Awakens breathed new youthful life into the series and is a worthy sequel. The Force Awakens is a big, fun nostalgia blast featuring some of the Star Wars old guard and introducing new characters, Rey, Finn, Kylo Ren and, most importantly, BB-8. The effects may look a tad dated now, but the Abyss was SFX filmmaking at its best when it was released in the late 80s. Directed by James Cameron, sandwiched between Aliens and Terminator 2 in his oeuvre, the film is about a diving team looking for a lost nuclear submarine but instead encounter something wholly different. It's a thought-provoking slice of sci-fi that's more thriller than action. Adapted from Andy Weir's breezy, initially self-published novel of the same name, The Martian is all about Mark Watney, Matt Damon, an astronaut left behind on Mars after he's presumed dead, and the rescue mission that ensues. It's a great, fun film and without a doubt director Ridley Scott's best movie in years. It not only looks great, but Matt Damon is superb as the shipwrecked Watney, playing more for laughs than action. The first X-Men was the first in the new wave of superhero movies that proved to the world that you could make an adult movie out of comic book characters. Director Bryan Singer played on heady themes such as the Holocaust and homoality to hook X-Men's metaphors around, which helped ground the characters and make for a great movie. X2 expands on this and is arguably one of the best superhero stories ever made, introducing Stryker, Brian Cox, as the former Army commander who was key to making Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, what he is. When news hit that Edgar Wright was no longer helming Ant-Man, there was very good reason to believe that Ant-Man would be terrible, given Wright had been trying to shape the project into something for years. The result, with Peyton Reed on board, though, is a fun, speedy heist movie that bears all the hallmarks of previous Marvel movies but does it all on a smaller scale. Director Neil Blomkamp's debut was years in the making. District 9 started out as a short film, which showed off Blomkamp's impressive talent with visual effects and subsequently helped him get the movie greenlit. District 9 is a fun, if on the nose, look at the apartheid in South Africa. It just so happens aliens are the ones that are getting the rough treatment. The film is the debut of Sharlto Copley, who is brilliant as the scientist hiding out in the alien slums. The original Blade was a fun, gory take on Marvel's vampiric superhero. But it's Blade 2 where the character really started to have bite. Helmed by Guillermo del Toro, the visionary director adds all sorts of weird and wonderful characters into the Blade universe and also introduced Whistler, a true screen badass. Timur Bekmambetov may be a Hollywood director now, but where his American movies are visually appealing but pretty awful. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, the remake to Ben-Hur, Night Watch, which he made in his native Russia, is fantastic. At the time of its release, 2004, it was the most successful Russian movie for all time and for good reason. It's a brilliant, sometimes incoherent fantasy that melds Bekmambetov's great style with a story that involves modern-day vampires that are split into two factions, the night and the day. Don't try and understand it, just feast on the surreal, stunning visuals. Splitting the last book in the series was a mistake, as instead of having one fantastic movie, you instead have two good ones. Mockingjay Part 2 is by far the darkest Hunger Games movie, but it's well made and a fitting end to the franchise. While there's not enough Hunger Games-style action scenes, the end showdown is worth the wait and elevates the movie above its fiction leanings. The film that pretty much got Rian Johnson the job to helm Star Wars Episode 8, Looper, is a timey-wimey tale that is set in 2074, when time travel has been invented but subsequently banned. This doesn't stop a band of outlaws, called Loopers, using the technology to assassinate people in the past for payment. Yes, it's convoluted, but it's also a gripping film that doesn't let up until its twist ending. The Look of Silence is a sequel of sorts to The Act of Killing, which is sadly not on Netflix. It was created by Joshua Oppenheimer and focuses on a man who confronts the men who killed during the 1965 purge of communists in Indonesia in the 60s. He confronts them while giving them eye exams, a ruse to get them to speak. It all makes for uneasy but riveting viewing. Jim Carrey has always been an actor that takes things to extremes, whether it's his face-gurning or physical comedy. But nothing was quite like what he did in Man on the Moon, the Milos Forman-directed biopic of Andy Kaufman. Mixing exclusive interviews and behind-the-scenes footage of Carrey that the studios didn't want released, this is one revealing documentary about the things people do to make people laugh. Full of hubris that you can only get when a documentary crew gets more than they bargained for. See also, The Jinx. Weiner follows the mayoral campaign of Anthony Weiner only for him to be embroiled in a scandal as the cameras are still shooting. And the best bit about it is, the documentary was meant to be about Weiner's comeback after another scandal that happened in 2011. It's a tough but compelling. Director Martin Scorsese may well be known for his Hollywood productions, but he has a decent sideline in rock documentaries. The latest to hit Netflix focuses on George Harrison, knitting together archive footage with interviews and home movies. It's a warm, revealing portrait of arguably the most talented Beatle, and one that came out 10 years after his untimely death. With nuclear war still a threat today, and a growing one at that, a documentary on how atomic warfare came to be was always going to feel prescient, but the bomb feels like more than that. It's an assault on the senses that weaves archive footage together to create a non-linear, experimental piece that's more mosaic than montage, with a message that's pretty clear: we need nuclear disarmament and we need it now. The bomb toured the film festival circuit with live band The Acid and was even shown at Glastonbury's Shangri-La. While it's no doubt not as potent as it was in a live space, it's still well worth a. And if you need a non-Netflix companion piece, then check out Storyville, Atomic, Living in Dread and Promise by Mark Cousins. Metal on Metal, it's what I crave, the louder the better, I'll turn in my grave, like a real-life Spinal Tap. The story of Anvil, the oft-forgotten heavy metal pioneers, is as tragic as it is funny and uplifting. A huge influence on the likes of Metallica and metal's megastars, Anvil never got to enjoy the success of their peers, resigned to the axe-wielding history books. Except, Anvil never went away. Continuing to shred on the toilet circuit, the documentary follows the aging rockers as they make one last attempt at hitting the big time. Throw up the horns, but keep a hanky at the ready. Anvil, the story of Anvil is as good as a rock jock gets. This doc about the 1999 Columbine High School massacre is a must. It's a frankly frightening look at why the massacre took place and how failings in the U.S. school system and the ease of use guns can be bought in the U.S. were to blame for what happened. Nearly 20 years on, the documentary will still have a profound effect on all who it. The White Helmets is, quite rightly, the winner of Netflix's first ever Oscar. It was directed by the only British winner of the 2017 Oscars, too. Orlando von Einsiedel directs this stunning look at the day-to-day operations of the Syrian civil defense, volunteers who assist neighborhoods that have been bombed, helping find survivors amongst the devastation. It may only be 40 minutes long, but the bravery and tragedy you witness will stay with you forever. Netflix bagged its first BAFTA thanks to this stunning documentary. 13th looks at race and the U.S. criminal justice system, showcasing numerous injustices in the way African Americans have been treated in the system. The documentary was made by filmmaker Ava DuVernay, who also made the superb Selma. Some Kind of Monster is an intimate look at one of the most successful heavy metal bands ever, Metallica. This unflinching doc focuses on the band as they hit a crossroads, the departure of their bass player. We see a band that's been together for 20 years talk through their emotions and pain points. By enlisting the help of a therapist, the documentary is a fascinating fly-on-the-wall look at a rock group in group therapy. One of the most important documentaries of the decade, Blackfish charts the life of killer whale Tilikum, who sadly died recently. Kept in captivity as a performance mammal at SeaWorld, the doc explores the unsightly side of why keeping whales in captivity is a terrible idea. Blackfish had such an impact that SeaWorld decided to phase out its orca shows and rebrand itself. Powerful stuff. This Netflix-exclusive documentary is a heart-wrenching look at one of the greatest singers of all time. While the highlights are definitely seeing Simone sing live, there's a huge amount of never-before-seen archive footage. It's the eye-opening truths about her troubled life that hit home hardest. Cartel Land works great as a companion piece to Sicario, found in our best thriller list. It's a documentary focused on the bloody and brutal battle between drug runners on the US-Mexican border and a vigilante group of civilians who have had enough and fight back. Produced by Kathryn Bigelow, Cartel Land is a despairing punctuated by some stunning cinematography and a fantastic score. A movie about chess shouldn't be this riveting, but Bobby Fischer Against the World is a stunning portrait of a man who was one of the best chess players in the world. Featuring interviews from other chess luminaries, such as Garry Kasparov, the documentary looks into the tumultuous life of Fischer, who won everything going in the 60s, only to disappear into obscurity for some 20 years. This documentary may have gained prominence thanks to its DJ shadow, but it's the subject matter that makes Dark Days such a must. Shot and directed by Mark Singer, Dark Days shines a light on those who live in underground tunnels under New York. Criminally, this was Singer's only foray into documentary filmmaking, but at least he created a classic. At nearly 3 hours long, Hoop Dreams is an exhaustive and very personal look at two teenagers trying to make it big in professional basketball. The two kids in question, William Gates and Arthur Agee, are from poor backgrounds, which makes the push to basketball superstardom even more effective. The film won Best Documentary at the Sundance Film Festival, and for good reason. It's one of the best sports movies ever made. The Queen of Versailles is a documentary with a difference. It starts off being about the Siegel family, one of the richest in America, who are building the most expensive house in the US. During filming, however, the Great Recession of 2008 hits and David Siegel's timeshare business is hit badly, leaving the building work halted. As his wealth slowly evaporates, the cameras continue to roll. Also consider Amanda Knox, Hostage to the Devil, Hot Girls Wanted, Keith Richards Under the Influence, Kurt. A conspiracy theory, just JFK to see how creative his jigsaw-like thinking can get. Olive Stone was the perfect choice to direct Snowden, a film about Edward Snowden, arguably the most prolific leaker the US has ever had. Charting his life from his cut-short army career to his desk job in the NSA, focusing on cyber warfare, the story humanizes a person who already feels like a myth and adds bones to why he decided to go against the US government and uncover a truth that included mass surveillance and more. Eminem proved he's got the acting chops to go along with his rapping in this Oscar-winning drama, that's based heavily on his life. Charting the rise of Jimmy B. Rabbit Smith Jr. Eminem, a budding rapper who lives in a Michigan trailer park, as he attempts to launch his career. gaining critical and commercial success when it released. This is one of the best films currently on Netflix. It's nowhere near director Danny Boyle's best, but Trance is still a fun ride. It's a film that reunites Boyle with his old writing partner John Hodge, who also recently went on to make T2, Trainspotting with Boyle, and is about an art heist that goes wrong. To understand what happened, a hypnotherapist is hired to try and find a missing painting. The story ends up being hard to understand, but when the visuals are this good, you won't really mind. The Stephen King Renaissance continues with 1922, a movie based on a little-known short story by the horror author taken from his 2010 Full Dark, No Stars compilation. It's an assured film with a great central performance by Thomas Jane, who plays a farmer in the 1920s who murders his wife, a crime that sparks off a strange string of events. It's slow-burning, but when the horror finally creeps in, it's a tough but mesmerizing. American Sniper is a taut, tension-filled tale about Chris Kyle, a skilled sniper who 160 people when he was a U.S. Navy SEAL. If you can forgive the embellishing of truth to heighten drama and the fact the film offers up a one-sided view of Kyle's achievements, American Sniper is one of Clint Eastwood's more assured movies. It's a troubling movie, though, one that both tries to moralize war and showcase the after effects of being in a war zone. Ben Affleck's directorial debut is a superb, taut thriller that's based on every parent's worst nightmare, the disappearance of their child. Ben's brother Casey Affleck and Michelle Monaghan star as two detectives who take on the missing persons case, even though they have little experience in a case of that type. Based in Boston, the film manages to showcase the heart of the city, where the Afflecks are from, as well as tell a tragic tale in the most human way possible. Kathryn Bigelow is one of the greatest action filmmakers around, so was a perfect for helming Zero Dark 30. Based on the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the movie keeps the terrorist mostly in the background and instead focuses on the people who were key to bringing him to justice. No one would like to see bin Laden caught more than Jessica Chastain's Maya, an operative who has spent most of her career chasing him. Whatever your take on the war on terror, this is riveting stuff. With Twin Peaks Season 3 currently trying to outweird the world, it's a perfect time to immerse yourself in the delicious nastiness of Blue Velvet once more. The film is a triumph of oddness, based around a seemingly wholesome man, Kyle MacLachlan, who gets embroiled in the underworld, thanks to his infatuation with a mysterious woman. This is David Lynch at his finest. Based on the amazing true tale of an FBI informant who infiltrated the highest reaches of the mafia, only to nearly be turned himself, Donnie Brasco is a mob movie like no other. Stellar performances from both Johnny Depp and Al Pacino, this is an assured gangster tale. David Cronenberg was on a roll when Eastern Promises came out. It was his second feature to, well, feature Viggo Mortensen. The first is The Peerless: A History of Violence, and is about the goings-on of the Russian mob in the UK. Mortensen is frightening as a mob member, but it is Naomi Watts who steals the show as the midwife who has a dangerous secret to tell. In what is one of the best performances in a long and varied career, Michael Caine is utterly brilliant in Harry Brown, A British Falling Down, where a pensioner goes to extremes to avenge his friend's death and battle the crime, drugs and unrule that have taken over his neighbourhood. It's a stark tale that holds a broken mirror up to the UK's inner city life. To be a fan of Danny Boyle is to be a fan of movies in general. His style flits and changes with each film he does. You'd be hard-pressed to put a label on what is a Danny Boyle movie. But one thing he has with aplomb is style. 127 Hours is a tense, visceral meditation in loneliness. Based on the true story of Aaron Ralston, played by James Franco, a thrill-seeker who finds himself between a rock and a hard place when he gets his arm stuck in a canyon. What ensues is a man who, through sheer strong-mindedness and some DIY surgery, tries to find his way out of a terrible situation. One of the most talked about films at 2016's Sundance Festival, I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, is the directorial debut of Macon Blair, a face you will know very well if you've seen the likes of Blue Ruin and Green Room. Starring the ever-wonderful Melanie Lynskey and Elijah Wood, the movie is about two people who go on a revenge mission after they both get burgled. The whole thing plays out like 90s Tarantino-esque thriller, complete with bizarre happenings and fantastic central performances. Tragically, Green Room is now earmarked as one of the final films of Star Trek actor Anton Yelchin. He is fantastic in this tale about a band being trapped in a club with a group of skinheads after they witness a horrific murder. It starts off slow, but once the events happen, the film ratchets up the tension to almost breaking point. One of the first movies to be made under the Netflix banner, Beasts of No Nation sees Idris Elba on fine form as a commandant fighting in a civil war. But the biggest praise has to go to Abraham Atazagu, a boy soldier caught in the fighting. Directed by Kerry Joji Fukunaga, who made the first season of True Detective the masterpiece it was, this is a harrowing but great. Gillian Flynn's twisty novel is perfect fodder for director David Fincher. It's dark, almost without a moral compass, and probes into the dark recesses of the human condition. Ben Affleck is superb as Nick Dunn, the grieving husband whose wife has disappeared. But it is Rosamund Pike who deserves all the accolades. Her portrayal of Amazing Amy is something of a roller coaster. Fargo is the perfect Coen brothers film. Funny enough to make you chuckle, it's also filled with some ridiculously dark moments, most of which involve Steve Buscemi's bumbling hitman and William H. Macy as the cowardly corrupt Jerry Lundegaard. The star of the film, however, has to be Frances McDormand's heavily pregnant, inquisitive and just on-tootin' nice detective. Brian De Palma is a magpie filmmaker. His style apes that of his hero, Alfred Hitchcock, and he loves to make remakes. Blowout is one of his best. A reimagining of the seminal 60s film Blow Up, De Palma moves the action from London to the US and focuses on not photography as Travolta stars as a effects producer who believes he has caught a real murder on tape. Also consider Carlos the Jackal, The Purge, Anarchy, Gone Baby Gone, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, We Need to Talk About Kevin, The Parallax View, Rear Window, Serpico, Natural Born Killers, the ultimate romantic film. Perhaps. It's definitely one of the best you are likely to have. When Harry Met Sally is an all-time classic, brimming with confidence that only comes when you nail the acting, script and direction. Sally is played by Meg Ryan, someone who has been friends with Harry, a pristine Billy Crystal, for years but lost contact. They meet up again, when their lives are a little different, and the rest is history. Rob Reiner does a fantastic, subtle directing job here, but top marks go to the script by the late Nora Ephron. What Dreams May Come was hard when it was first released at the tail end of the 90s, but it's even harder now, following the death of Robin Williams. It's about Chris Nielsen Williams, who dies in a car accident, only to wake up in one of the most beautiful places ever. When his wife commits suicide, though, he decides to try and find her in hell. It's a beautiful one that's both visually stunning and emotionally so. It's not perfect, but it is worth just to see the towering presence of Robin Williams on film once more. Woo-ha, or hoo-ha. However you want to say it, Al Pacino coining that wonderful Al Pacino phrase is just one of the many highlights of Scent of a Woman. It's a fantastic film about a blind army officer and his relationship with his helper Chris O'Donnell. Featuring an early appearance from Philip Seymour Hoffman, O'Donnell's best role, yes, even better than Robin, and a brilliant central role from Pacino whose acting, and Tango, earned him an Oscar. This is unmissable old-school cinema. Director Damien Chazelle, Whiplash, does it again with La La Land, creating a fantastic Al romance about two creatives trying to make it big in Los Angeles. One is an aspiring actress, the fantastic Emma Stone, while the other, Ryan Gosling, is a jobbing, jazzy and hoping for his big break. The dance routines are a wonder too, but this isn't just a film that relies on gimmickry, it's a well-told modern-day love story. Yes, it was made to capitalize on the huge success of Indiana Jones, but this is no rip-off. Directed by the brilliant Robert Zemeckis and blessed with two of the most charismatic stars of the 80s, Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, the movie is an absolute blast. It's a film about a romance author who heads to Colombia to find her kidnapped sister, only to find herself face to face with an adventurer, Michael Douglas. With equal measure action and comedy, romancing the stoners of the fun only a rock-solid 80s flick can muster, Earl and the dying girl manages to make the most out of a plot that would normally depress the hell out of everyone. Film fanatic Greg, a superb Thomas Mann, is tasked with looking after Rachel, Olivia Cook, a local girl who has been diagnosed with leukemia. Instead of playing on the sadness of the situation, Greg makes the most of their time together by spoofing some of his favorite films and making Rachel a movie tribute. It's sentimental stuff but not sweet enough to rock your teeth. Charlie Kaufman does it again with Anomalisa, offering up an adult take on relationships using one of the most childlike forms, puppetry. David Thewlis and Jennifer Jason Leigh lend their exquisite voices to the movie, but it's the animation and the heartbreaking story of a man that experiences something out of the ordinary that shines through. If you can forgive the ending, there was definitely room for Jack on that raft. Titanic is one of the best, and certainly most epic love stories. The sinking of the Titanic plays second fiddle to the romance of Jack, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Rose, Kate Winslet, two lovers from different social groups that end up on the illustrious liner, the Titanic. Yes, it's overwrought and melodramatic, but it's still one hell of a. Wes Anderson's quirky directing is a perfect fit for Roald Dahl's Fantastic Fox. Lovingly crafted using stop animation that's voiced by Anderson alumni and George Clooney, the film works well as a kid's animation, but it's adults that will get the biggest kicks. Director Anderson is going back to stop animation for his next feature. Let's hope it's half as good as the Fantastic Mr. Fox. Charlie Brown and his dog, Snoopy, are iconic cartoon characters, and in this new computer-generated film, which was co-written and co-produced by Charles Schulz's son and grandson, is a brilliant continuation of that legacy, pleasing existing fans and winning over new ones in a tale that sees Charlie Brown try to impress little red-haired girl. It's the first Peanuts feature film in 35 years, but the wait was worth it. This is by no means a perfect film, but it is a must. After the phenomenal success of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Gilliam and some of the crew embarked on trying to make Lewis Carroll's poem The Jabberwocky for the big screen. It's the absurd slathered onto the absurd. Unlike the Holy Grail, it's a proper film and not a series of loose sketches draped around a plot, and it has a real epicness to it. This is something that Gilliam masters better in The Time Bandits, but does an admirable job here. It's best to see The Jabberwocky not as a Python movie, but a Gilliam one, and that is no bad thing. BFG is brought to larger than life brilliantly by Steven Spielberg and the acting talents of Mark Rylance. While the film may be a little too slow for younger viewers, it's a mesmerizing, full of the scatological humor of the book, but also slathered in beautiful imagery that blends the real world and CG seamlessly. Spielberg has done wonders to bring Roald Dahl's big classic to the big screen. An animated movie lives or dies by its animation, and that's what makes James and the Giant Peach so good. Its unique look is because of Henry Selick, the genius director who also brought Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas alive. His animation is a perfect companion for Roald Dahl's Twisted Tale. Directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, who made the greatest anime around, Akira, Steam Boy is a superb Victorian London-infused tale about a young inventor who has to do everything he can to make sure his granddad's inventions don't fall into the wrong hands. It looks amazing, but is sometimes let down by its storytelling. It's definitely worthy, though, even if it does get a little too silly. The geniuses that brought us Wallace and Gromit decided not to use their most famous creations for their first feature-length movie. Instead, they chose this brilliant, endearing story about the lives of some chickens in a chicken run. Mel Gibson adds his voice for some A-list star power, but it's the stop-motion animation that stand out here. Roald Dahl's greatest book, Matilda, is given a great adaptation, thanks to director and star Danny DeVito. While brilliant at playing one of Matilda's awful parents, it's his direction that's key here, weaving together hyperreal imagery, a faithfulness to the book, and the right balance of comedy and unpleasantness. Unfairly shunned by critics when it was first released, Hook is a fun spin on the Peter Pan mythos. Directed by Steven Spielberg, he brings his child-eyed wonder to the Pan world, shifting the narrative to a grown-up Pan played brilliantly by Robin Williams. His performance is backed by Dustin Hoffman at his funniest as Captain Hook, and too many other great performances to mention. Muppet madness ensues in The Dark Crystal, yet another classic brought to life by the majesty of Jim Henson and his puppet creations. It may not be as loved as Labyrinth, but it's still a brilliant children's tale about the search for a crystal that once brought balance to the world. In the not-so-distant future, people are ranked, judged and given jobs not based on their abilities and interests, but on their genetic makeup. Gattaca follows the story of a man with less than perfect DNA, Ethan Hawke, who is desperate to travel into space, which is a privilege only reserved for the perfect. With the help of another man with 10 out of 10 DNA, Jude Law, he tries to game the system to bag himself a seat on the next mission to the stars. As you'd expect from this clever sci-fi story, there are lots of challenges, problems and interesting twists along the way. The original, Swedish movie adaptation of Stieg Larsson's popular novel The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo made its way to Netflix in March 2018. The story is the first part in Larsson's Millennium series trilogy, which follows the lives of Mikael Blomkvist and Lisbeth Salander as they attempt to uncover the truth about a murder and a number of related conspiracies. David Fincher made an English-speaking version of the movie a few years later. Although it was still entertaining, the Swedish original is one of our favorites, which is likely down to the exceptional talent of Noomi Rapace, who plays Lisbeth Salander. Calvary is an intense, disturbing and at some points darkly funny story about a priest in a small, rural town in Ireland who receives a mysterious death threat. While waiting to find out who the shady, would-be killer is, the priest continues about his daily business, which reveals that criminal acts, racism and domestic abuse run rife in the community. It's whatever the opposite of easying is, so be prepared. But it's a very well-made and captivating move in which Brendan Gleeson really shines as the protagonist priest. Stephen King's classic tale of the trials and tribulations of high school, fitting in, and having extremely powerful telekinetic powers, has landed on Netflix, bringing the unforgettable and gruesome bloodbath of the 1976 imagining to the small screen. Joining Stephen King's Carrie on Netflix comes another classic story from the horror author's creepy collection, Misery, bringing the tale of the story, which will be making anyone who has seen it wince right now, straight to your living room. The movie follows a famous author who is rescued from a car crash by a fan. We won't spoil what happens next, but you can probably guess it's not exactly the warm, homely kind of recovery you'd expect after you've had an accident. It's certainly not one for the faint-hearted, so prepare to hide behind a cushion for about 50% of the running time.